The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Clarence House as Charles Windsor stood behind his mahogany desk, his weathered hands gripping a stack of documents that would change everything. The weight of his decision pressed down on his shoulders like the crown he would soon wear. But today felt different. Today, he was making a choice that had nothing to do with royal duty and everything to do with protecting what remained of his fractured heart. Camilla sat across from him in the leather chair she had occupied countless times before, her fingers nervously adjusting the pearl necklace that had been a wedding gift from him 7 years ago. She could sense the tension in the room, thick as London fog, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. "There's something we need to discuss," Charles began, his voice carrying the formal tone he reserved for the most serious of matters. The same voice he had used when announcing Diana's death to the world, when addressing Parliament about constitutional matters, when the weight of the monarchy required him to be more institution than man. Camilla's blue eyes searched his face, looking for clues in the familiar lines around his eyes, the set of his mouth. After decades of knowing this man, she had learned to read him like a well-worn book, but today, the pages seemed blank, closed off from her in a way that made her stomach tighten with dread. "Charles, you're frightening me," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's happened?" He moved to the window that overlooked the gardens where they had walked together so many evenings, planning their future, dreaming of a time when their love would no longer be scrutinized by the world. The irony wasn't lost on him now, that the very privacy they had fought for would be shattered by his own hand. "It's about your family," he said, still facing the window. "About Tom, about Laura, about the connections that tie us to a past that the monarchy can no longer afford to carry." The mention of her children sent a chill through Camilla's body. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes had been part of Charles's extended family for years now, their children calling him grandfather, their lives intertwined with royal functions and private celebrations. They had built something resembling a normal family, despite the extraordinary circumstances. "I don't understand," Camilla said, rising from her chair and moving toward him. "What about my family? What's happened to them?" Charles turned to face her then, and she saw something in his expression that she had never seen before. Not in all their years together through scandal and separation, through Diana's death and their eventual marriage. It was the look of a man who had made an impossible choice and was prepared to live with the consequences, no matter how devastating. "The King's Council has made it clear that certain associations are no longer tenable," he said, each word measured and deliberate. "Your son's business dealings, the gambling debts, the questionable partnerships, Laura's husband's financial troubles. The press is circling, and there are investigations that could implicate the crown." Camilla felt the room spinning slightly, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted without warning. She had known about Tom's struggles, about his restaurant ventures that never quite succeeded, about his tendency to make poor financial decisions. Laura's marriage to Harry Lopes had always been solid, but she knew there had been some difficulties with his family's estate management. "But surely we can handle this," she said, reaching for his arm. "We've weathered worse storms. Remember the phone recordings, the public hatred, the years of being called the other woman. We survived all of that." Charles gently removed her hand from his arm, the gesture so small, yet so final, that it sent a shock wave through her entire body. "This is different, Camilla. This isn't about our past or our personal relationship. This is about the future of the monarchy itself." The documents on his desk seemed to mock them both, official papers with royal seals and legal language that would sever connections built over decades. Charles had spent sleepless nights reviewing the evidence his security team had compiled, the financial records that painted a picture of carelessness at best, potential corruption at worst. "Tom's restaurant in Mayfair has been laundering money for a gambling syndicate," Charles continued, his voice growing harder with each revelation. "The debts he's accumulated aren't just personal anymore. They've made him vulnerable to people who would use any connection to the royal family for their own purposes." Camilla sank back into the chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Tom, her firstborn, the boy who had struggled to find his place in a world that had scrutinized his every move since his mother's relationship with the Prince of Wales became public. She had watched him battle with his identity, with the pressure of being associated with royalty while trying to make his own way in the world. "And Laura?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Harry's family estate is being investigated for tax evasion going back 15 years, Charles said quietly. "The amounts involved are substantial. If charges are brought, and if Laura is found to be complicit in any way, the implications hung in the air between them like a sword waiting to fall." Camilla understood the mathematics of royal survival better than most. She had learned it the hard way, through years of being painted as the villain in a fairy tale that the public had desperately wanted to believe in. "What are you saying, Charles?" she asked, though part of her already knew. He returned to his desk and picked up the official documents, the weight of them seeming to bend his shoulders forward slightly. "I'm saying that effective immediately, there can be no further contact between the royal household and your children. No invitations to state functions, no inclusion in family celebrations, no financial support or legal protection." The words hit Camilla like physical blows. She thought of her grandchildren, of little Gus and Louis who had grown up thinking of Charles as their grandfather, who had spent Christmas mornings at royal residences, who had been promised a future that included this strange, magnificent family they had been born into by marriage. "You're cutting them off," she said, the words sounding foreign in her own voice. "You're cutting off my children." "I'm protecting the crown," Charles replied, but there was no triumph in his voice, only the hollow sound of a man doing what he believed he had to do. "I'm protecting the institution that has endured for over 1,000 years. I'm ensuring that William and his children inherit a monarchy that isn't tainted by scandal." Camilla stood again, this time steadier, as if the shock had given way to something harder, more determined. "And what about us, Charles? What about our marriage? What about the vows we made?" For the first time since the conversation began, Charles seemed to falter. The official documents trembled slightly in his hands, and she saw a flash of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, before duty and destiny had claimed him so completely. "Our marriage remains," he said quietly. "But it will be different, more formal, more distant from your family than we had hoped." "Different how?" she pressed, sensing weakness in his resolve. Charles set the documents down and looked directly at her. "You'll need to choose, Camilla. You can stand by your children and face whatever consequences come from their actions, or you can stand by the crown and accept that sometimes duty requires the ultimate sacrifice." The choice he was presenting her with was no choice at all, and they both knew it. How could a mother turn her back on her children? How could a wife abandon the man she had waited decades to marry? How could a woman who had finally found her place in the world willingly step back into the shadows? "I need time," she said finally. "There is no time," Charles replied. "The press conference announcing the severance of ties is scheduled for this afternoon. The palace has already prepared a statement about the need to maintain the highest ethical standards in all royal associations." Camilla felt something breaking inside her chest, not the clean snap of a bone, but the slow, terrible tearing of tissue that has been stretched beyond its limits. She had always known that marrying into the royal family meant accepting a life of impossible choices, but she had never imagined being forced to choose between her children and her husband. "They need me," she whispered, thinking of Tom's struggles with alcohol, of Laura's quiet strength in holding her family together through financial difficulties. "My children need their mother, and I need my queen," Charles said simply. The title hung between them, heavy with obligation and expectation. Queen Camilla. It was what she had dreamed of becoming, what she had sacrificed so much to achieve, but in this moment, it felt like a cage rather than a crown. Outside the window, the gardens of Clarence House bloomed with spring flowers, oblivious to the human drama playing out within the stone walls. Somewhere in London, her children were going about their lives, unaware that their world was about to shift dramatically. Somewhere in the palace, staff members were preparing press releases that would reshape the royal family's public image once again. And in this room, between the desk that held documents of severance and the chair that had witnessed so many intimate conversations, Camilla faced the most impossible decision of her life. The morning sun continued its arc across the sky, marking time toward an afternoon press conference that would change everything, regardless of what choice she made. The afternoon arrived with unseasonable gray clouds that seemed to mirror the mood inside Buckingham Palace. Camilla had spent the hours since her morning conversation with Charles in a state of emotional suspension, moving through the palace corridors like a ghost haunting her own life. She had tried calling Tom 3 times, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Laura was at her children's school sports day, living her normal life while unaware that everything was about to change. The blue drawing room had been chosen for the private family gathering that would precede the public announcement. It was a cruel irony that this room, where she had shared some of her happiest moments as a member of the royal family, would now witness her undoing. The Baroque ceiling seemed to mock her with its painted cherubs and golden flourishes, symbols of a permanence she had mistaken for her own. William arrived first, his tall frame filling the doorway as he surveyed the scene with the careful assessment that had become second nature to him since inheriting his father's responsibilities. Behind him came Catherine, elegant as always, but with a wariness in her green eyes that suggested she understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. "Father," William said, nodding to Charles before turning to Camilla with a politeness that felt like ice. "Camilla." The formality of his greeting cut through her like a blade. For years, William had warmed to her gradually, accepting her role in his father's happiness, even if he could never fully embrace her as a replacement for his mother. They had found a comfortable middle ground, a relationship built on mutual respect and shared affection for Charles. Now, even that seemed to be crumbling. Anne entered with her characteristic briskness, followed by Edward and Sophie. The room filled with the quiet tension that accompanies moments when a family must witness the destruction of one of its own members. They arranged themselves in a semicircle, like judges preparing to hear a case, with Camilla standing slightly apart, suddenly aware of how easily she could be separated from this group she had worked so hard to join. "I suppose you all know why we're here," Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for difficult conversations. The morning's private anguish had been replaced by the public mask he wore so well, but Camilla could see the cost of that transformation in the new lines around his eyes. "The palace has received information that makes it impossible for us to maintain our current family arrangements," he continued, carefully avoiding looking directly at Camilla. "Certain associations have become untenable from both a legal and public relations standpoint." Anne shifted in her chair, her expression unreadable. As the hardest-working member of the royal family, she had little patience for drama, but infinite respect for the institution they all served. "How bad is it?" she asked, with characteristic directness. Charles gestured to a leather folder on the side table, thick with documents and photographs that painted a damning picture of financial impropriety and questionable associations. "Bad enough that continuing any relationship could compromise the monarchy's reputation at a time when we can least afford it." William leaned forward slightly, his journalist's instincts engaged despite his personal feelings. "What specifically are we looking at? Prison time? Financial ruin? Media circus?" "All of the above," Charles replied quietly. "Tom's restaurant has been a front for money laundering operations. The amounts involved are significant enough to warrant serious criminal charges. Laura's situation is more complex, but her husband's family estate has been systematically evading taxes while accepting government agricultural subsidies. If prosecuted to the full extent, we're looking at years of legal proceedings and constant negative publicity." Camilla felt each revelation like a physical blow. She had known her children struggled with money, had even helped them out financially on more than one occasion. But the scope of their troubles was far beyond anything she had imagined. The woman who had once been accused of destroying a marriage was now watching her own children destroy her second chance at happiness. "Surely there must be something we can do," Catherine said gently, her natural compassion evident despite the circumstances. "Some way to help them through this without completely severing ties." Charles shook his head slowly. "The palace legal team has been quite clear. Any assistance, financial or otherwise, any public association, any inclusion in family events, could be construed as the crown interfering with legal proceedings. Worse, it could suggest that we believe different rules apply to those connected to the royal family." Edward, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke up. And what does Camilla think about all this? The question hung in the air, and suddenly all eyes turned to her. She realized that this was the moment Charles had orchestrated. The point at which she would have to publicly choose between her children and her royal duties. The family that surrounded her waited for her response, their faces a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and judgment. "I think," Camilla said slowly, her voice steadier than she felt, "that a mother's duty to her children doesn't end because of their mistakes." The words fell into silence like stones into still water, creating ripples of discomfort that spread across the room. William's expression hardened. Anne's eyebrows rose slightly, and Charles's jaw tightened in a way that suggested he was fighting to maintain his composure. "That's admirable," Anne said finally, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "But you're not just a mother anymore, Camilla. You're the queen consort. You have duties that extend beyond your personal feelings." "I never asked to be queen consort at the expense of being a mother," Camilla replied, surprised by the strength in her own voice. William stood abruptly, his movement sharp and decisive. "Then perhaps you shouldn't be queen consort at all." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Charles went very still, his face draining of color as he stared at his eldest son. Catherine reached for William's hand, but he pulled away, his anger and frustration finally breaking through the careful control he had maintained. "We all know the sacrifices this family requires," William continued, his voice rising slightly. "My mother understood them. She died understanding them. And now you're telling us that your personal loyalty to children who have betrayed that sacrifice is more important than the institution we've all sworn to protect?" Camilla felt tears beginning to build behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people who were watching her like spectators at a particularly brutal sport. "Your mother died because she couldn't balance those loyalties either," she said quietly. "Perhaps the institution is the problem, not the people who struggle to serve it." The blasphemy of that statement reverberated through the room, to suggest that the monarchy itself might be flawed, that the institution they had all dedicated their lives to serving might be inherently destructive, was tantamount to treason in this particular company. Charles finally found his voice. "That's enough," he said. But whether he was addressing William or Camilla wasn't clear. "This isn't about the institution. This is about protecting what we've built together. What we owe to the British people. What we owe to future generations." "What about what we owe to each other?" Camilla asked, looking directly at her husband. "What about what we owe to the people we love?" Sophie, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "Sometimes love means letting go," she said softly. "Sometimes it means making the hard choice to protect something larger than yourself." The words were gentle, but they carried the weight of someone who had successfully navigated the transition from commoner to royal, who had learned to subsume her personal desires for the greater good. They were meant to be supportive, but to Camilla they felt like another nail in the coffin of her hope. "Easy words from someone whose children aren't facing prison," Camilla replied, immediately regretting the harshness of her tone but unable to take it back. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Charles stepped between his wife and his sister-in-law, his diplomat's instincts finally kicking in despite his personal turmoil. "We need to focus on solutions," he said firmly. "The press conference is in 2 hours. We need to present a united front, regardless of our personal feelings about the situation. A united front that doesn't include my children," Camilla said. "A united front that protects the crown," William countered. The divide between them was now complete and visible. On one side stood Charles, William, Anne, Edward, and Sophie. Representatives of an institution that had survived world wars, scandals, and social upheaval by always putting duty before personal desire. On the other side stood Camilla, alone, representing the simple human need to protect one's own children, regardless of the cost. "I won't abandon them," Camilla said finally, the words coming out as both a declaration and a plea. "I can't stand up there and pretend that cutting off my children is the right thing to do. I won't be part of a press conference that destroys my family to save your institution." Charles closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, Camilla saw that she had lost him. The man who had waited decades to marry her, who had defied his mother and his advisors and public opinion to make her his queen, had chosen the crown over her heart. "Then you'll need to decide what your priorities are," he said quietly. "Because in 2 hours, I'm going to announce that the royal family is severing all ties with Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. And if you can't support that decision publicly, then perhaps you need to reconsider your own position in this family." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was consuming everything they had built together. Camilla looked around the room at faces that had become familiar over the years, people who had gradually accepted her presence in their lives, who had included her in their traditions and their troubles. Now they looked at her like she was already gone, like she was already just a memory of a failed experiment in modern monarchy. Outside, she could hear the sounds of London continuing its daily rhythm, unaware that in this ornate room, a queen was about to lose everything she had fought to gain. The press conference was 2 hours away. The choice that would define the rest of her life was waiting. And for the first time since she had become Queen Camilla, she wondered if the price of wearing a crown had finally become too high to bear. The press conference room at Buckingham Palace buzzed with anticipation as journalists from around the world settled into their assigned seats. Camera crews adjusted their equipment, while photographers tested their flashes, all of them sensing that whatever announcement was coming would be significant. The hastily called gathering had sparked rumors throughout London's media circles, with speculation ranging from health concerns to constitutional crises. Camilla stood in the anteroom behind the main hall, staring at her reflection in an ornate mirror that had witnessed decades of royal preparations. Her makeup had been professionally applied to hide the evidence of tears, her hair styled into the familiar, elegant coiffure that had become her signature look. The navy blue dress she wore was conservative and regal, chosen by her stylist to project stability and dignity, but behind the carefully constructed facade, she felt like she was dissolving from the inside out. 20 minutes earlier, she had made one final attempt to reach her children. Tom's phone still went to voicemail, but this time, she left a message, her voice barely steady as she tried to explain the impossible situation they were all facing. Laura had answered, her confusion evident as Camilla tried to prepare her for what was about to become public knowledge. "Mummy, I don't understand," Laura had said, her voice small and frightened in a way that reminded Camilla of the little girl she had once been. "Harry says his solicitor thinks they can work everything out quietly. Why can't we just wait and see what happens?" The innocence in her daughter's voice had nearly broken Camilla's resolve. How could she explain that in the world of royalty, perception was often more dangerous than reality? How could she tell her daughter that guilt or innocence mattered less than the appearance of impropriety when the crown was involved? Now, as she prepared to face the cameras, Camilla found herself thinking about the woman she had been before all of this began. Camilla Shand, then Camilla Parker Bowles, a countrywoman who loved horses and gardening and simple pleasures. That woman would never have imagined standing in a palace, preparing to choose between her children and her crown. That woman would have chosen her children without hesitation. Charles appeared beside her, his own reflection joining hers in the mirror. He looked every inch the king he had become, his uniform perfectly pressed, his bearing straight and dignified despite the personal cost of what they were about to do. But when their eyes met in the glass, she saw the man she had fallen in love with. The one who had written her letters for decades, who had waited patiently for the chance to make her his wife. "There's still time," he said quietly, his voice so low that only she could hear. "You can still stand with me. We can still present this as a united decision made for the good of the monarchy." Camilla turned to face him directly, abandoning the mirror and its reflections for the reality of the man before her. "And my children? What happens to them when I stand beside you and announce that they're no longer part of our family?" "They'll survive," Charles said. But there was no conviction in his voice. "People adapt. They find new paths forward. Like Diana adapted." The words slipped out before Camilla could stop them, and she immediately regretted the cruelty of the comparison. But it was too late to take them back, and they hung between them like a chasm that could never be bridged. Charles's face went very pale. "That's not fair, Camilla. That's not the same situation at all, isn't it?" She pressed, knowing she was destroying whatever remained of their relationship but unable to stop herself. A woman forced to choose between love and duty? A mother separated from her role in protecting her children? Someone sacrificed for the good of the institution. The sound of voices from the press room grew louder, indicating that the time for private conversation was nearly over. Palace staff members moved efficiently around them, making final preparations for an announcement that would reshape the royal family once again. "I won't do it, Charles," Camilla said finally, her voice steady for the first time all day. "I won't stand beside you and abandon my children. I won't be part of destroying them to save your crown." The words fell between them with finality. Charles stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through disappointment, anger, and something that might have been relief. Perhaps part of him had always known this moment would come, had always understood that their love story was too complicated to have a fairy tale ending. "Then what are you going to do?" he asked. Before Camilla could answer, a palace aide approached them with the nervous energy of someone bearing unwelcome news. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty," he said, addressing them both with the formal titles that now felt like barriers rather than honors. "The press is ready. We're prepared to begin whenever you give the word." Charles looked at Camilla one last time, a question in his eyes that she answered with a small shake of her head. Whatever they had built together over the decades, whatever love had sustained them through scandal and separation, whatever dreams they had shared about growing old together as king and queen, it was ending in this moment. "Proceed with the original plan," Charles told the aide. "I'll be making the announcement alone." The aide's eyes widened slightly at this deviation from the prepared schedule. But years of royal service had taught him not to question sudden changes in protocol. He bowed slightly and hurried back toward the press room to make the necessary adjustments. Camilla began removing her jewelry, starting with the diamond earrings that had been a coronation gift from Charles. Each piece felt heavy with symbolism as she placed them on the nearby table, returning to him the tokens of a role she could no longer play. "Keep them," Charles said softly. "Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide to do, those were gifts from a husband to his wife, not from a king to his queen." The distinction between his two roles, his two identities, had been the source of so much conflict throughout their relationship. In this moment, Camilla saw clearly that she was losing both the husband and the king, that there was no way to separate the man from the institution he served. "I'm going to them," she said, meaning her children. "I'm going to Tom and Laura, and I'm going to help them through whatever comes next. I'm going to be their mother. Even if I can't be your queen." Charles nodded slowly, understanding that this was goodbye in a way that felt both inevitable and impossible. "The palace will prepare a statement about your decision to step back from royal duties due to family circumstances. We'll try to frame it as a temporary leave, rather than a permanent separation." "Don't," Camilla said firmly. "Don't leave the door open for me to come back. Don't make this about temporary circumstances or leaves of absence. Tell them the truth. Tell them that the queen consort has chosen her children over her crown, and that she doesn't regret that choice." The honesty of her request seemed to surprise Charles. Throughout their relationship, they had become experts at managing public perception, at finding ways to present their choices in the most palatable light. Now she was asking him to let the world see her decision in all its raw complexity. "That will destroy any chance of rehabilitation," Charles warned. "That will make it impossible for you ever to return to royal life." "Good," Camilla said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. "I want it to be impossible. I want to burn the bridges so completely that I'm never tempted to sacrifice my children again." The sounds from the press room indicated that the journalists were growing restless. Charles would need to go out soon and face the cameras alone, to explain why his wife was not beside him for such an important announcement. The palace staff was probably frantically rewriting talking points and preparing for the inevitable questions about the queen consort's absence. "I did love you," Camilla said, using the past tense deliberately. "I loved you enough to wait decades for you, Creasy be lie, Granterly and see, to endure public hatred, to give up everything I thought I wanted. But I love my children more than I love being queen. I love them more than I love you." Charles accepted this final blow with the dignity that had been bred into him from birth. "I know," he said quietly. "And perhaps that's why I fell in love with you in the first place. Your capacity for fierce, protective love. Even if it's ultimately what takes you away from me. The aide appeared again, this time with barely concealed urgency. Your Majesty, we really must begin. Charles straightened his shoulders and checked his appearance one final time in the mirror. When he looked back at Camilla, she saw that he had already transformed into the public figure who would address the nation, leaving the private man behind in this room with her. Goodbye, Camilla, he said formally. Goodbye, Charles, she replied. He walked toward the press room with measured steps, and she moved in the opposite direction, toward a side exit that would take her away from the palace and back into a life she would have to rebuild from scratch. Behind her, she could hear his voice beginning the announcement that would tell the world about the severing of ties with her family, about the need for the highest ethical standards in royal associations. She didn't stay to hear him explain her absence. Instead, she walked through corridors she had once called home, past portraits of queens who had come before her, past rooms where she had hosted state dinners and private celebrations. Her heels clicked against marble floors that would echo with other footsteps now, other voices, other stories. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm. Traffic moved through streets that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. People went about their lives, unaware that in a palace press room, their queen was being erased from the official narrative of their monarchy. Camilla emerged into the gray afternoon light and breathed deeply for the first time in hours. The weight of the crown she would never wear again was already lifting from her shoulders, replaced by something she had almost forgotten. The simple, terrible, liberating freedom of being just a mother again. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Mum, finally got your message. I'm so sorry. Laura and I are at her house. Come home. Come home. The words meant something different now. Something smaller but infinitely more precious than palaces and protocol. Camilla hailed a taxi and gave the driver Laura's address, leaving behind the life she had fought so hard to build in favor of the family she had always been meant to protect. As the taxi pulled away from Buckingham Palace, she didn't look back. There would be time later for regret, for wondering what might have been different, for grieving the love story that had ended in such spectacular failure. But for now, she was simply a mother going to comfort her children. And that felt like the most royal thing she had ever done.